Rosa Martinez checked her reflection in the small mirror hanging in the staff break room. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She had learned long ago that being invisible meant being perfect. No wrinkles, no stains, no reason for anyone to notice her. Tonight was different from her usual catering gigs. The Grandview Country Club was the fanciest place in the entire city. She had driven past it countless times on her way to work, always wondering what it looked like inside. Now she knew. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The ballroom sparkled like something from a fairy tale. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow patterns on the white marble floors. Each table was covered with cream-colored silk tablecloths and decorated with white roses that probably cost more than Rosa made in a week. The silverware gleamed, and the wine glasses caught the light like tiny diamonds. Rosa picked up her tray and walked back into the ballroom. The guests were already arriving for the charity gala. She watched them through the corner of her eye as she arranged water glasses on table 12. These were the kind of people she only saw on TV or in magazines. The women wore designer dresses that cost thousands of dollars, and their jewelry caught the light with every movement. The men looked comfortable in their expensive suits, laughing, and shaking hands like they owned the world. And maybe they did. Rosa recognized some faces from newspaper articles. There was the tech billionaire who had just bought another company, the real estate mogul who owned half the downtown buildings, the mayor's wife, who always appeared at charity events wearing a different expensive outfit each time. Rosa moved between the tables like a ghost. She had perfected the art of being there without being seen. Fill the water glasses. Straighten. The silverware smile politely if someone made eye contact but never linger. Never draw attention. That was the rule for people like her in places like this. As she worked, she caught fragments of conversation. They talked about their latest vacations to Europe, their children's private schools, and business deals worth millions. Their problems seemed so different from hers. They worried about which yacht to buy while she worried about making rent. But Rosa didn't feel bitter about it. She had learned to find beauty in her work. There was something peaceful about creating perfect table settings, about making sure everything was just right. It was like arranging a stage for a play, even if she would never be one of the actors. The evening progressed smoothly. Rosa and her fellow servers moved through the room like dancers, bringing out course after course of expensive food. The guests seemed happy, talking and laughing as they ate. The charity auction would begin soon, and then the main event everyone was waiting for. That's when Rosa noticed the piano. It sat in the corner of the ballroom, its black surface polished to mirror perfection. It was a grand piano, the kind she had only seen in concert halls on television. Beautiful and elegant. It waited silently for its moment to shine. Rosa found herself staring at it every time she passed by. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory, remembering the feel of keys beneath her touch. It had been so long since she had played. Too long. She forced herself to look away and focus on her work. But the piano called to her like an old friend. She could almost hear the music it could make, the songs it was waiting to sing. The other servers noticed nothing unusual. To them, Rosa was just doing her job, same as always. They had no idea that she was fighting an internal battle. That part of her wanted to walk over to that piano and let her fingers dance across its keys, but that was impossible. People like Rosa didn't play pianos at places like the Grandview Country Club. She was hired to serve drinks and clear plates, not to make music. The guests would be shocked if the help suddenly sat down at their expensive piano, so she continued her work, professional and invisible. She smiled when guests thanked her, nodded when they made requests, and kept her eyes down most of the time. But every few minutes her gaze would drift back to the piano and her heart would skip a beat. The dinner was almost over. Soon would come the part of the evening everyone was waiting for. The famous pianist who would entertain them while they sipped their coffee and donated money to charity. Rosa had heard the other servers talking about him. He was supposed to be amazing, someone who had played in concert halls around the world. As Rosa cleared the last of the dinner plates, she wondered what it would feel like to sit at that beautiful piano, to feel those smooth keys under her fingers again, to let music fill this elegant room and touch the hearts of everyone listening. But that was just a dream, a silly fantasy that had no place in her real world. She was Rosa Martinez, the invisible waitress, and that piano belonged to someone else's story, not hers. At least that's what she thought. The evening was about to take a turn that nobody expected. Not the wealthy guests, not the event organizers, and certainly not Rosa herself. Sometimes life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and tonight was going to be one of those nights. As Rosa walked toward the kitchen with her tray of dirty dishes, she had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything was going to change. The invisible waitress was about to step into the spotlight, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piano sat waiting, as if it knew what was coming, as if it had been waiting for Rosa all along. The first sign of trouble came at 8:30. Rosa was in the kitchen loading dirty dishes into gray plastic bins when she heard raised voices from the ballroom. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Something was wrong. She peeked through the service door and saw Linda Hartwell, the event coordinator, pacing near the piano with her phone pressed to her ear. Linda was usually calm and collected, the kind of person who could handle any crisis with a smile. But right now her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "What do you mean he's not coming?" Linda's voice carried across the ballroom. Several guests turned to look at her, their conversations trailing off. "He confirmed yesterday the contract is signed." Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. She had a bad feeling about this. Linda ended the call and immediately dialed another number, then another. Rosa watched as the coordinator's calm facade cracked with each phone conversation. The other servers had noticed too. They gathered near the kitchen door, whispering among themselves. "What's happening?" asked Tony, one of the veteran servers who had worked events like this for over 10 years. "I think the pianist canceled," whispered Jennifer, another server who had excellent hearing. "I heard Linda mention something about a car accident." Rosa's heart sank. She knew how much this performance meant to the evening. The guests had paid $500 per plate, partly for the dinner but mostly for the entertainment. Without the pianist, the charity gala would feel incomplete. She watched as Linda walked over to the small stage where a microphone stood waiting. The coordinator's smile looked forced as she tapped the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Linda began, her voice slightly shaky, "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Our featured performer, Jonathan Ashworth, has been involved in a minor car accident and won't be able to join us tonight." A murmur of disappointment swept through the ballroom. Rosa saw several guests shake their heads and reach for their phones, probably checking if they could leave early. "We're working on finding a replacement," Linda continued, though her voice lacked confidence. "In the meantime, please enjoy your dessert and coffee." But Rosa could see that the energy in the room had changed. The guests were restless now. Some were already standing up, making excuses to leave. Others were asking the waiters when the evening would end. The cheerful atmosphere from dinner was evaporating like steam from a hot cup of coffee. Linda made more phone calls, each one more desperate than the last. Rosa caught pieces of her conversations as she refilled coffee cups around the room. "Please, I'll pay double your usual rate," Linda pleaded into her phone. "It's for the children's music program. Surely you know someone who's available tonight." But it was a Friday evening, and most professional musicians were already booked. Those who weren't were either too far away or asking for fees that would eat up most of the charity's fundraising goals. Rosa felt terrible for Linda, but she felt worse for the charity. She had read about the children's music program in the newspaper. It provided instruments and lessons for kids who couldn't afford them. Many of these children had real talent but no opportunity to develop it. Tonight's gala was supposed to raise enough money to keep the program running for another year. As the minutes ticked by, more guests began to leave. They made polite excuses about early mornings and important meetings, but Rosa could see the disappointment in their faces. They had come expecting a memorable evening, and instead they were getting an awkward, incomplete experience. Rosa found herself staring at the piano again. It looked so lonely sitting there, waiting for hands that would never come. The beautiful instrument was silent when it should have been singing. She thought about all those children who needed the music program. Kids who loved music the way she once had but couldn't afford lessons or instruments. Tonight was their big chance to get the funding they needed, and it was slipping away because of one missing pianist. An idea began to form in Rosa's mind. Crazy, impossible idea that made her heart race and her palms sweat. She knew she could play that piano, not at a professional level maybe, but well enough to entertain people. She had been taking lessons since she was 7 years old, back when her grandmother was still alive and could afford to pay for them. She had played in school concerts and talent shows. Music had been her first love, her biggest dream. But that was before life got complicated, before her grandmother died and left her with bills to pay, before she had to drop out of high school to work full-time, before music became a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, she had never stopped playing completely. When she cleaned houses, she sometimes played the pianos she found in wealthy people's homes, just for a few minutes when no one was around. Her fingers still remembered the songs she had learned years ago. Her hands still craved the feel of keys beneath them. But could she really do it? Could she, Rosa Martinez, the invisible waitress, sit down at that grand piano and play for 300 of the city's most important people? The idea terrified her. What if she made mistakes? What if they laughed at her? What if she got fired? She needed this job. She couldn't afford to take risks like this. But as she watched more guests prepare to leave, as she saw Linda's desperate attempts to save the evening, Rosa felt something stirring inside her. It was the same feeling she used to get as a child, when she sat at her grandmother's old upright piano and let her fingers find their own way across the keys. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to help, not as the invisible waitress, but as someone who could make a difference, someone who could save the evening and help those children who needed music in their lives. The question was, did she have the courage to try? Rosa looked around the ballroom, one more time. She saw the disappointment on people's faces, the empty stage, the silent piano waiting for someone to bring it to life. She thought about the children who would lose their music program if tonight failed. And slowly, very slowly, she began to walk toward Linda Hartwell. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her legs felt weak and her mouth was dry. But she kept walking. She was about to do something that would change her life forever. She just didn't know it yet. Rosa's hands trembled as she approached Linda Hartwell. Each step felt like walking through thick mud. Her mind was screaming at her to turn around, to go back to the kitchen, to stay invisible and safe. But her heart kept pushing her forward. Linda was standing near the piano, frantically scrolling through contacts on her phone. Her perfect makeup was starting to smudge, and strands of hair had escaped from her neat bun. Rosa had never seen the usually composed event coordinator look so stressed. "Excuse me, Miss Hartwell." Rosa's voice came out as barely a whisper. Linda looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "Not now, please. I'm dealing with a crisis here." Rosa took a deep breath. This was her last chance to back out, to return to her safe, invisible world. Instead, she stepped closer. "I might be able to help," Rosa said, her voice stronger this time. Linda blinked at her, as if really seeing her for the first time all evening. "Help? How?" Rosa's mouth felt like sandpaper. "I can play piano." For a moment, Linda just stared at her. Then she glanced at Rosa's server uniform, then back at her face, then at the uniform again. "You're one of the catering staff," Linda said, slowly. "Yes, ma'am. But I've been playing piano since I was 7. I could play some background music, maybe, just to help save the evening." Linda's first instinct was clearly to say no. Rosa could see it in her eyes. The idea of a waitress performing at a $500 a plate charity gala was absurd. What would the guests think? What would the country club management say? But then Linda looked around the ballroom and saw what Rosa had been seeing. More empty tables. More guests heading for the exits. The charity's biggest fundraising event of the year was falling apart. "Can you really play?" Linda asked quietly. Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. Linda chewed her lip, clearly torn. "What kind of music do you know?" "Classical mostly. Some jazz. A few popular songs." Rosa's voice was getting steadier. "Nothing too fancy, but enough to provide some atmosphere." Linda looked at the piano, then back at Rosa. Rosa could practically see the internal debate playing out on the coordinator's face. Professional reputation versus complete disaster. The risk of embarrassment versus the certainty of failure. "I don't know," Linda muttered. "This is highly unusual. These people paid a lot of money." "They paid for an evening of music," Rosa interrupted gently. "Maybe it doesn't matter who provides it as long as it's good music." That seemed to strike a chord with Linda. She looked around the ballroom again, counting the remaining guests. Then she made her decision. "All right," she said, her voice tight with nervousness. "But just background music, okay? Nothing too attention-grabbing. And if it doesn't work out, we stop immediately." Rosa nodded eagerly. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As Linda walked away to make an announcement, Rosa stood alone beside the piano. Suddenly, the full weight of what she had just volunteered to do hit her like a truck. She was about to sit down at a grand piano in front of 300 wealthy, sophisticated people who expected professional-level entertainment. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her fingers stumbled over the keys? What if her mind went blank? What if they all laughed at the presumptuous waitress who thought she could entertain her betters? Rosa's breathing became shallow and rapid. Panic started to set in. Maybe she should tell Linda she had changed her mind. Maybe she should run to the bathroom and hide until the evening was over. But then she heard Linda's voice over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, while we continue to work on our main entertainment situation, one of our staff members has graciously volunteered to provide some piano music for your enjoyment." Rosa felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The conversations died down to whispers. She could feel their curiosity, their skepticism, their judgment. Part of her wanted to disappear into the floor. Instead, she walked to the piano bench and sat down. The bench was the perfect height, cushioned in soft black leather. Rosa had never sat at such an expensive instrument before. She placed her hands on the keyboard and felt a familiar thrill run through her fingers. The keys were perfectly weighted, responsive to even the lightest touch. For a moment, she just sat there trying to calm her racing heart. She could hear the guests talking quietly among themselves. She caught fragments of their conversations. "Who is she?" "One of the servers, I think." "This should be interesting." "Poor thing, she looks terrified." Rosa closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother. Abuela had always told her that music was a gift meant to be shared, not hidden. "When you play, mija," her grandmother used to say, "you're not performing for people. You're sharing your heart with them." Rosa opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. She started with something simple and safe, a gentle piece by Bach that she had learned years ago. The first few notes were tentative, uncertain, but as her muscle memory kicked in, her confidence grew. The piano responded beautifully to her touch. Each note rang out clear and true in the elegant ballroom. Rosa could feel the guests' attention shifting from skeptical curiosity to genuine interest. She moved from Bach to a soft jazz piece she had learned from an old songbook. Her fingers found the familiar patterns, and the music began to flow more naturally. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was making music. As she played, Rosa began to forget about the guests, the fancy ballroom, her server's uniform. The world narrowed down to just her and the piano, the way it used to when she was a child practicing in her grandmother's living room. The guests had stopped talking almost entirely now. Rosa could feel their attention like warmth on her back. But it didn't feel judgmental anymore. It felt appreciative. She transitioned into a beautiful, melancholy piece that she had written herself years ago. It was a song about dreams deferred but not forgotten, about hope surviving in dark places. She had never played it for anyone before. It had always felt too personal, too revealing. But tonight, in this moment, it felt right to share it. As in, the last notes of her composition faded into silence. Rosa finally looked up from the keys. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the ballroom was looking at her, and they weren't looking at a waitress anymore. They were looking at a musician. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Rosa's heart hammered in her chest as she waited for their reaction. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she overstepped some invisible boundary? And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, came the sound of one person clapping. Then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Rosa sat frozen at the piano bench, hardly believing what was happening. These sophisticated, wealthy people, the same ones who had barely noticed her all evening, were giving her a standing ovation. Linda Hartwell appeared beside the piano, her face beaming with relief and amazement. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Would you mind playing a few more pieces?" Rosa looked out at the faces in the crowd. They were smiling now, energized in a way they hadn't been all evening. The disappointment and restlessness were gone, replaced by genuine enthusiasm. "I'd be happy to," Rosa said, and she meant it. As she turned back to the keys, Rosa realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer the invisible waitress trying to save the evening. She was a musician, sharing her gift with people who wanted to hear it, and for the first time in years, Rosa felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Rosa's second piece was a classical sonata by Mozart, one that she had performed at her high school talent show many years ago. As her fingers danced across the keys, she felt a confidence she hadn't experienced in ages. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one clear and precise. But something magical was happening in the ballroom. The atmosphere had completely transformed. The restless energy from earlier was gone, replaced by something Rosa had never expected: genuine appreciation and wonder. She could see it in their faces as she played. The tech billionaire who had been checking his phone all evening was now leaning forward in his chair, completely absorbed in the music. The mayor's wife, who had seemed bored during dinner, was nodding along with the melody. Even the teenagers, who had been dragged to the event by their parents, were paying attention. As the Mozart piece came to an end, Rosa made a bold decision. Instead of stopping or playing another safe classical piece, she transitioned into something more contemporary, a jazz arrangement of a popular song that she had taught herself from YouTube videos during her lunch breaks. The change in musical style caught everyone by surprise, but in the best possible way. Rosa could hear people whispering excitedly to their table companions. This wasn't just background music anymore. This was a real performance. Rosa felt her years of suppressed musical passion pouring out through her fingertips. Every song she had hummed while cleaning houses, every melody she had heard on the radio and wished she could play, every dream she had pushed aside to focus on survival, it all came flooding back. She moved from the jazz piece into a beautiful ballad that told the story of her own life without words. It spoke of childhood dreams and grown-up struggles, of love lost and hope found, of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when life gets hard. The ballroom had fallen completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped working to listen. Rosa could see them standing along the walls, their faces filled with amazement. Tony, the veteran server, was wiping tears from his eyes, but it was the guests' reactions that truly amazed Rosa. These people who lived in a world of luxury and privilege were being moved by her music in a way she never could have imagined. She saw the real estate mogul's wife reach for her husband's hand during a particularly emotional passage. She watched a young couple lean closer together as the melody swirled around them. Rosa realized that music had the power to break down barriers. In this moment, it didn't matter that she was wearing a server's uniform while they wore designer clothes. It didn't matter that she lived paycheck to paycheck while they owned multiple homes. The music spoke to something universal in all of them, the part of the human heart that yearns for beauty and connection. Feeling emboldened by their response, Rosa decided to take an even bigger risk. She began to play an original composition, something she had been working on in her head for months but had never had the courage to put down on paper, let alone perform for others. This piece was different from anything she had played before. It started soft and gentle, like morning sunlight filtering through curtains. Then it grew stronger and more complex, building layers of melody and harmony that painted a picture of dreams taking flight. As she played, Rosa felt like she was telling her story to the room. The quiet child who had fallen in love with music, the teenager who had to choose between her dreams and her family's survival, the young woman who had spent years serving others while her own talents remained hidden, and finally the moment of courage that had brought her to this piano tonight. The music swelled and soared, filling every corner of the elegant ballroom. Rosa's fingers moved with confidence and precision, guided by years of suppressed passion, finally set free. She wasn't thinking about technique or making mistakes anymore. She was simply sharing her heart with everyone who would listen. As the piece reached its climax, Rosa felt tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home to herself, after years of being lost. The final notes of her composition rang out clear and pure in the crystal chandelier-lit ballroom. As the last echo faded into silence, Rosa lifted her hands from the keys and looked out at her audience. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the room was on their feet. The standing ovation began slowly, with just a few people, but within seconds it had spread throughout the entire ballroom. The applause was thunderous, genuine, and filled with emotion. But it wasn't just the applause that moved Rosa. It was the expressions on their faces. She saw tears in the eyes of the tech billionaire. The mayor's wife was clapping with such enthusiasm that her expensive jewelry sparkled under the chandeliers. The teenagers were cheering and whistling their approval. Linda Hartwell appeared, beside the piano, her own eyes bright with tears. "Rosa," she said, her voice filled with amazement. "That was absolutely extraordinary. I've never heard anything like it." People were approaching the piano now, eager to congratulate her. The real estate mogul shook her hand warmly and told her she was incredibly talented. The mayor's wife asked if she had recorded any of her original compositions. A young couple asked if she would consider playing at their wedding. But perhaps, the most meaningful comment came from an elderly gentleman who reminded Rosa of her grandfather. "Young lady," he said, taking her hands in his weathered ones, "you have a gift, a real gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As more people gathered around the piano, Rosa felt overwhelmed by their kindness and enthusiasm. These were the same people who had barely noticed her an hour ago, and now they were treating her like a celebrated artist. Linda Hartwell returned with a microphone in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "I think we can all agree that Rosa Martinez has given us a truly special evening. But I hope you'll remember that tonight is about supporting the children's music program, giving other young people the chance to develop their musical talents, just as Rosa has done." The reminder of the charity seemed to energize the crowd even more. People were pulling out their checkbooks and credit cards, eager to contribute to a cause that suddenly felt very personal and meaningful. After hearing Rosa play, called out the tech billionaire, "I'm doubling my original donation." "Make that triple," shouted someone else. The fundraising that had seemed doomed just an hour earlier was now exceeding everyone's wildest expectations. Rosa watched in amazement as Linda tallied up the donations. The evening had raised enough money to fund the children's music program for 3 years instead of 1. As the formal part of the evening wound down, people continued to approach Rosa. Some wanted to talk about music, others had questions about her background, and many simply wanted to thank her for the beautiful evening she had given them. But the most important conversation of the night was yet to come. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached the piano with a business card in his hand. "Ms. Martinez," he said with a warm smile, "my name is David Chen. I'm the director of the Riverside Concert Hall. I'd very much like to discuss some performance opportunities with you." Rosa stared at the business card, hardly believing what she was hearing. The Riverside Concert Hall was one of the most prestigious venues in the city. We host a monthly series called Emerging Artists, Mr. Chen continued. It's designed to showcase local talent that deserves wider recognition. After hearing you play tonight, I think you'd be perfect for our program. Rosa's hands shook as she took the business card. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Mr. Chen replied kindly. Take my card. Call me when you're ready, but please don't wait too long. Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden. As Mr. Chen walked away, Rosa looked around the ballroom one more time. The elegant room that had seemed so intimidating when she first walked in now felt warm and welcoming. The people who had been strangers were now friends, and the piano that had called to her all evening had become the instrument of her transformation. Rosa Martinez had arrived at the Grandview Country Club that evening as an invisible waitress, but she was leaving as something entirely different, a recognized musician with a real chance at the life she had always dreamed of. The best part of all? This was only the beginning. 3 days after the charity gala, Rosa's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She stared at it in disbelief as another unknown number appeared on the screen. Ever since that magical night at the Grandview Country Club, her quiet life had been turned, completely upside down. The first call had come on Saturday morning. Rosa had been getting ready for her weekend shift at a corporate event when her phone buzzed. The caller introduced herself as Jessica Walsh from the City Arts Council. Ms. Martinez, I was at the gala on Friday night, Jessica had said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. Your performance was absolutely incredible. We'd love to have you play at our annual fundraising dinner next month. Rosa had almost dropped the phone. The City Arts Council dinner was one of the most important cultural events of the year. Famous musicians from around the world performed there. Are you sure you have the right person? Rosa had asked, still not quite believing it was real. Oh, I'm very sure, Jessica had laughed. After Friday night, everyone in the city is talking about you. That turned out to be no exaggeration. By Sunday afternoon, Rosa had received calls from 3 different event planners, 2 wedding coordinators, and a music teacher who wanted to discuss collaboration opportunities. Her simple flip phone, which usually sat silent for days at a time, had become the center of a whirlwind of activity. But the most surprising call came on Monday morning. Rosa was at her regular catering job, a business lunch at a downtown hotel, when Linda Hartwell called. Rosa, I have an unusual request, Linda said without preamble. The Grandview Country Club has asked if you would consider becoming their regular pianist for special events. They're offering you a part-time position with excellent pay. Rosa nearly dropped the tray of coffee cups she was carrying. The Grandview Country Club wanted to hire her? Not as a server, but as a musician? They were that impressed? Rosa asked, still trying to process what she was hearing. Impressed doesn't begin to cover it, Linda replied. The club's members have been calling all weekend asking when you'll play again. Mrs. Westbrook, you remember the real estate heiress, has specifically requested you for her daughter's engagement party next month. Rosa found herself saying yes before she had time to think about it. The salary Linda mentioned was more than she made in a month of catering work. And it would mean playing music regularly, instead of just dreaming about it. But the opportunities didn't stop there. David Chen from the Riverside Concert Hall called on Tuesday with details about their Emerging Artists program. The monthly concerts featured solo pianists performing for audiences of classical music lovers. The pay wasn't huge, but the exposure could launch a serious musical career. We typically have a waiting list of 6 months for new performers, Mr. Chen explained. But after Friday night, I'm willing to fast-track your audition. Are you available this weekend? Rosa's hands were shaking as she wrote down the audition details. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Just 1 week ago, she had been invisible. Now people were offering her chances to make music her career. The audition at Riverside Concert Hall was both terrifying and exhilarating. Rosa had never played in a formal concert setting before. The hall was smaller than the Grandview Ballroom, but somehow more intimidating. The acoustics were perfect, designed to showcase every nuance of a performer's technique. Mr. Chen sat in the 5th row, along with 2 other members of the programming committee. Rosa had prepared 3 pieces, a Bach prelude, a Chopin nocturne, and her original composition from the gala. As she played, Rosa tried to recapture the feeling from that magical Friday night. She focused on the music itself, on sharing the emotions and stories that lived within each piece. By the time she finished her original composition, she could see tears in Mr. Chen's eyes. "Welcome to the Riverside Concert Hall family," he said. Simply, Rosa's first official concert was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Mr. Chen explained that they would advertise it in the local arts magazines and newspapers. She would be performing for a paying audience who came specifically to hear her play. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Rosa's life changed in ways she never could have imagined. She kept her part-time catering work. She wasn't ready to give up that steady income quite yet, but she began to build a musical career alongside it. Her first performance at the Grandview Country Club was a private dinner party for 50 people. Rosa had been nervous, wondering if she could recreate the magic of that first night. But as soon as she sat down at the familiar piano, the nervousness melted away. The guests were warm and appreciative, and several of them booked her for their own events. Word spread quickly through the city's social circles. Rosa found herself playing at anniversary parties, corporate events, and intimate concerts in people's homes. Each performance built her confidence and expanded her repertoire, but perhaps the most meaningful gig came from an unexpected source. The children's music program that had benefited from the original charity gala invited Rosa to perform at their student recital. Standing in the school auditorium, surrounded by young musicians with beat-up instruments and hand-me-down sheet music, Rosa felt a deep connection to her own childhood. These kids had the same hunger for music that she had felt at their age, the same dreams of someday performing on real stages. After the recital, a 10-year-old girl named Lupita approached Rosa with her mother. "Miss Rosa," Lupita said shyly, "will you teach me to play like you do?" Rosa's heart melted. "I'm not really a teacher, sweetheart." "But you could be," Lupita's mother said hopefully. "Lupita has been talking about you nonstop since the recital. She practices every day now, trying to play the songs she heard you perform." That conversation planted a seed in Rosa's mind. She had never considered teaching, but there was something appealing about passing on her love of music to the next generation. Within a month, Rosa had 3 young students. She taught them in her small apartment, using the old upright piano she had bought with her first paycheck from the country club. The lessons didn't pay much, but watching her students' faces light up when they mastered a new piece was worth more than money. As autumn approached, Rosa's calendar was fuller than it had ever been. She had regular gigs at the country club, a growing list of private clients, her monthly concert at Riverside Hall, and a small but devoted group of piano students. But the biggest change wasn't in her schedule or her income. It was in how she saw herself. For years, Rosa had defined herself by her limitations. She was the girl who couldn't afford college, the woman who worked 3 jobs just to pay rent, the server who smiled and stayed invisible. Music had been something she used to love, a dream she had given up to focus on survival. Now, when people asked what she did for a living, Rosa could say with pride, "I'm a pianist." The transformation wasn't always easy. Some nights Rosa lay awake wondering if it was all too good to be true. What if she made a mistake at an important performance? What if people stopped calling? What if she had to go back to being invisible? But then she would remember that night at the Grandview Country Club, the moment when she chose courage over safety, when she stepped out of the shadows and let her light shine. That moment had changed everything, not because it brought her fame or money, but because it reminded her who she really was. Rosa Martinez was a musician. She always had been, even when life forced her to hide that part of herself. The night she stepped up to the piano hadn't created her talent. It had simply given her permission to share it with the world. 6 months after the charity gala, Rosa received a call that brought her full circle. Linda Hartwell was organizing another fundraising event, this time for a scholarship fund for young musicians. "We'd love to have you as our featured performer," Linda said. "Not as a last-minute replacement this time, but as our headliner. Your name will be on the invitations." And everything. Rosa smiled as she looked around her apartment. Her calendar was hanging on the wall, filled with performance dates and teaching appointments. Her piano sat in the corner, surrounded by sheet music and thank you notes from students. In the bookshelf, she had started a small collection of programs, from concerts she had performed in. It wasn't a mansion or a fancy recording studio, but it was the home of a working musician. A woman who had found the courage to chase her dreams and had discovered they were worth catching. "I'd be honored to perform," Rosa told Linda. As she hung up the phone, Rosa walked over to her piano and sat down at the bench. She placed her hands on the familiar keys and began to play the song that had started it all. Her original composition about dreams deferred but never forgotten. But now the melody had a different ending. Instead of fading into uncertainty, it soared into a bright, hopeful future filled with infinite possibilities. Rosa Martinez, the invisible waitress, had become Rosa Martinez, the pianist. And her story was just beginning.